Dinosaur, written by Stephen Llewelyn and performed by Chris Barrie. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell to keep up to date with the latest installments.
Commander Baines sat alone on the bridge of the New World, typing up a report on the construction team's progress. The captain was adamant that all their actions be fully documented in case they ever found a way back. "We're lost 100 million years ago, and I still have to fill out reports," she addressed the air. "Still, I suppose it would make a hell of a read if anyone ever believed a word of it." Her musings were interrupted as the bridge comm binged for her attention. "Commander Baines here." "Commander?" replied a disembodied male voice. "This is Dr. Klaus Fischer. Would it be possible to interrupt the captain for a moment, please?" Frowning momentarily, she eventually placed the accent, just a hint of German to the otherwise excellent English. "I'm afraid he's not on the ship right now, Doctor. May I be of service?" "Certainly, Commander. Could we meet, please, just briefly?" "Of course, Doctor. I assume you're in the biology labs? I'll meet you there." Baines made sure her work was saved, while feeling guilty about being saved from her work. A few minutes later, she walked into Patricia Norris's domain, deep within the pod. The biologists were all hard at work early, it seemed, although Patricia appeared to be involved in an animated discussion with her son. Words such as beer, and shouting, and graffiti, and woodsy floated across the room. Grinning at the normalcy of the little domestic, betwixt teen and parent, Baines continued past them. Dr. Klaus Fischer strode across the lab to greet her with an unexpected cup of coffee, for which she thanked him. "It is only NASA's finest, I'm afraid," the German biologist apologized. "Thank you for seeing me so quickly, Commander. If you would kindly follow me, please. Dr. Norris has graciously offered me the use of her office for our chat." He ushered Baines into the office, offering her a seat. "So, Doctor," she said, "how can I help?" "Commander, there are 5 German nationals on this ship," he stated. Clearly embarrassed, he added, "As you know, there used to be 6. "Ah," said Baines, seeing where this was going. "And you feel associated? Implicated?" "Perhaps, in a way, Commander," Fischer acknowledged haltingly. "We just don't want the captain, or indeed anyone, to think that we are in any way linked with the actions of that young woman." Baines smiled sympathetically. "Try not to worry, Doctor. I don't think people would believe that you were. I know it hasn't even crossed the captain's mind, if that's any comfort." Fischer relaxed a little. We are very relieved to hear that, Commander," he said. "However, it may have crossed other people's minds, I'm afraid." Baines' expression darkened. "What's happened?" "Nothing much to speak of." Fischer held up a placating hand. "We did hear Mr. Bernstein whispering, 'The Krauts are at it again,' loud enough for all to hear in the mud hole last night." "Bernstein again?" exploded Baines. "As if we don't have enough to deal with." "Well, not just him, I'm afraid." Fischer looked genuinely sorry to have troubled her. "What else has happened?" she asked quietly. "As I said, nothing has happened exactly," continued Fischer. "We are just finding that more and more we are sitting in one another's company, you see." "Please explain precisely, Doctor." "I simply mean that a few of the other crew, and I must stress only a few, seem to want to move away from us. I'm sorry to burden you with something so trivial, Commander," he apologized. "Not at all, Doctor. Nor do I think this is trivial," she replied thoughtfully. "I'll have a word with the captain and see what he'd like to do. I will also impress upon everyone the importance of inclusivity." "Dr. Schultz was," Fischer sought the right phrase, "rather outspoken when it came to certain points of view." It's fair to say that Heidi possessed a strong sense of nationalistic pride. I didn't think it was any more than that, was it? "I'm not completely sure, Commander," he said, also looking thoughtful. "It has been over a century and a half since the Holocaust. Since then, the German people have been absolutely adamant that the sort of extremist faction who dominated our nation during that era never be allowed to rise again.
I understand, Doctor, Baines acknowledged. Recent history has borne this out fully. You have nothing to apologize for. My father was American and my mother was English, but I was born on the moon, so I'm fortunate in that I don't feel tied to anybody's past mistakes or excesses, really. Not that anyone should ever be accountable for the actions of previous generations. I believe it's what we do that counts. She smiled at the scientist sitting across the desk. The British, particularly the English, have been blamed for just about everything you can think of. I know history is always in danger of being repeated, but I think most of them believe in moving forward on merit now, rather than at someone else's expense. They also have much in their long, long history to be proud of, though, and rightly so. Is it not the same with Germany? A great nation of many extraordinary people mostly committed to a better future?
I would certainly hope so.
History is naturally weighted towards great and especially terrible events. We should certainly remember these lessons, but it seems to me we can learn far more about people from the way they fight to put things right than from hanging on to past prejudices and mistakes made by the powerful few.
Fisher smiled. Thank you, Commander. That's kind of you. However, in all nations there are always the hangers-on to the bad old days and the bad old ways, it seems.
You think that Schultz was some species of Nazi? Asked Baines, her concern growing.
I'm not sure. Sometimes she just made people feel schwach. Forgive me.
He searched his memory for the translation.
Weak. The way she looked at people gave some of us, as the Americans say, the creeps. He shook his head. She occasionally mentioned her grandfather, more in the way that she would say, "My grandfather would never tolerate this or that, or these people." It made the rest of us very uneasy. We had only known her a very short time and tried to remain on friendly terms, as you do in such close proximity, but it was difficult.
Yes, well, we were saddled with her and Lloyd on this ship. Imagine how much fun that was.
Fisher smiled politely.
Thank you for bringing all this to my attention, Doctor. Now, if you will excuse me, I'm feeling an overwhelming urge to interrupt Mr. Bernstein's breakfast.
The shuttle flew over the forests of Gondwana. The day was so sunny and the view so stupendous that any lyricist worth his salt could have found fame on the basis of a morning's work. All things seemed possible as Lieutenant Singh brought the ship in to hover above the place the crew now called Fossil Rock. The rock itself formed a steep-sided promontory buried under thick vegetation. The fortuitous clearing, which allowed the first shuttle mission to identify their extraordinary find, was situated at the top of these cliffs. The drop was not sheer, nor was it huge, maybe 15 or 20 meters, but it would be enough to make things difficult and potentially dangerous for the dig team. The Sarge viewed their landing zone with the calculating mind of a military strategist. The topography did offer one obvious benefit. The continuity of the crag around two sides of the proposed dig site would offer some defense from these directions against predators on the ground. If push came to shove, it would also mean there were fewer directions in which to run, of course. And then there was always attack from the air to worry about. The shuttle's engines seemed to put flight to the local wildlife, for a little while at least. The Sarge stood ready at the edge of the belly hatch, tallying his pros and cons. Captain Douglas wouldn't be derailed from this course, so he was in a make, do and mend situation. Ultimately, he could only ensure that the immediate vicinity was safe briefly while they unloaded everyone. After that, it would be in the lap of the gods. He led a security team of 8, including himself. They were of mixed ability and experience, but he would have to push that point aside too for the next few minutes. His was the vital task of coordinating with the pilot in order to help him lower the dig tent into position. The protective enclosure, far too big to fit into the shuttle's hold, was currently suspended by steel cables from the bottom of the ship like a giant plate cloche. In order to avoid damaging the archaeology, their plan was to lower the heavy structure and initially set it down adjacent to the dig site. The Sarge gave what appeared to be an innocent little dell one more visual sweep from the safety of the air before calling Singh with the all clear. The dig tent whomped gently into the ferns, sending a flurry of insect life into the air. Jackson sighed. Not just giants to worry about, then, he thought. There was very little rainforest left in the world he had known, but he had visited some of it. They were not his fondest memories. Singh held the shuttle steady for the loading crew to begin winching the first security down. The soldiers stepped onto the raft-like cradle they would use to lower all personnel and equipment in stages. It carried 4 men easily, so fortunately no one had to go down alone. The Sarge descended with the first group. The moment he had boots on the ground, he split the advance group into 2 pairs and quickly reconnoitred for hidden threats. Once satisfied, he radioed back up to the ship, reporting the immediate area safe and clearing the second armed detail to follow them down. With the area as secure as possible, the first diggers came next. The dig team were a group of 6, including Natalie Pearson and Thomas Beckett. Beckett was furious about his manner of evacuation from the shuttle.
"I would never have gone along with this if I'd known you weren't going to land," he railed.
"We have no choice," Natalie shouted back over the noise of the engines. "Cables and pulleys are all we've got."
"I want to go back,"
Beckett retorted.
"I'm a historian, not Tarzan."
"Sorry," said Natalie in his ear.
"What I meant is, you've got no choice.
We're the only people on this expedition who have even seen a dig, so get out." Beckett stumbled out onto the raft, with all the poise of a man drunk in charge of a punt, his profanities lost to the wind and the roar of the engines. Eventually, the diggers were all down and working within the perimeter of soldiers to examine the site. Their first task was to ensure the dig tent could be located without damaging anything of significance. Presently, Natalie asked the Sarge to radio the pilot and request that he lift the dig tent once more, ready for repositioning. Several nail-biting minutes later, the dig tent was placed near the edge of the cliff and over the archaeology. A small entrance hatch at the end was opened, allowing the team to scramble inside with their equipment. The structure was about 12 meters long and 7 in width, roomy enough for everyone and all their gear. The Sarge secured the hatch behind them, ordering his men to pop the ventilation flaps. There was barely a breath of wind, but at least they were safe for the moment. Douglas ordered Singh back to the New World, and with the shuttle's departure, there returned a relative silence to the clearing.
"Why?"
Natalie spoke quietly.
We're really alone now, aren't we?"
"Thank you for that little comfort,"
snapped Beckett. The ride down on the hoist had upset him badly. He was still shaking. Although inside the protective structure, the Sarge set his guards at all points of the compass, while the civilians set about unpacking everything. The captain and Patel scrutinized the fossilized tire tracks, marveling at the detail which remained. Despite the lack of a breeze, the materials used in the dig tent's manufacture made it fairly cool and airy inside. Opaque from the outside, the structure afforded the people inside a reasonable view of the surrounding forest through the walls. As the swell of the shuttle's engines died away down the valley, some of the braver or more inquisitive animals began to return, and the tiny glade filled once more with the chirruping and buzzing of small forest life. Far from threatening, it was idyllic. Only the Sarge remained unimpressed. High above them, a flash of sunlight reflected from the top of a rocky escarpment. It caught his attention immediately. He stared hard at the area, finally tearing open a pocket within his combat jacket to retrieve a small pair of field glasses. But whatever the cause, it was not to be repeated. Douglas moved to stand next to his chief of security. "What is it, Sarge?" he asked softly, taking care to keep his posture relaxed. Without looking away from the escarpment, the Sarge leaned close. "It's just possible we're being observed, sir," he whispered. Tim may have missed out on the archaeology, but he was very pleased with the consolation prize. Natalie knew how disappointed he had been. To make up for it, she had approached him with a most solemn request: to take care of someone she loved while she was away. More than that, if anything happened to her, she wanted to know that he would receive all the love and attention he needed for the rest of his days. Being of a fairly serious and diligent nature, Tim had accepted the responsibility at once and with sobriety. However, once Natalie had left, he lost no time in taking his temporary charge for exercise and, most importantly, playtime. Reva found the gymnasium a place of great entertainment. The young man ran around with his friend until he collapsed, panting. Realizing that the collie showed no such signs of fatigue or even calming down, it was up to him to develop a new strategy which would allow the game to continue. So, he now commanded the field from astride an exercise horse. His new game, Obstacle Course Fetch. Tim was practically bursting with news he was really not meant to tell anyone, while Reva was actually bursting balls he was really not meant to be playing with. Pop, another one. Dimly aware that he should probably stop taking them from the games cupboard, and that further mum-related aggravation could be a distinct possibility in his future, Tim tried to think of a solution. However, he had so much more on his mind at that moment. Although he had not been allowed to go with them, his imagination was nevertheless fully engaged in the mystery unfolding for the pseudo-archaeologists. Baffling did not even begin to describe the situation, and being sworn to secrecy made matters even worse. At least he could rely on Reva not to blab. Pop? Oops, how many is that now? Tim pondered, and then with a metaphorical pop, an idea occurred to him. A possible way to avert, or at least offset, his mother's wrath. When Rose's father, Jim, returned, he would ask if he could possibly manufacture a couple of dog-proof balls from the pod's polymer stocks. Tim had never owned a dog of his own. Their tiny housing cell had simply not allowed for one. Subsequently, he was unaware that even in the 22nd century, a successful platform for the dog-proof toy continued to elude man's grasp. Despite his ignorance in this regard, he was aware that if they ever wanted to play any sports again, a groundbreaking design might soon prove mission-critical. The repetition of throwing a ball over and over allowed his mind to drift elsewhere to the rhythm of the collie continuum. Reva had no idea that his constant, untiring circuit was helping Tim to think, but he did understand that this particular two-leg was very generous with the bouncy pop things. He would have been in trouble long ago had Mummy been here. Both boys were content in their own little worlds. Hero sat alone in the mud hole, eating a light lunch before his afternoon shift began. A man walked by his table, smiling in friendly greeting. Hero didn't know his name, so he nodded in return, but didn't speak. "Hero?" the stranger acknowledged as he passed. The engineer frowned slightly, turning to watch the figure walk away. He was fairly sure the man was unknown to him, although he would be the first to admit that his own facial recognition skills were poor. People confused him, wandering around without serial numbers the way they did. But there was something familiar about this fellow, a man who, to the best of his knowledge, he had never met before, but who clearly knew or at least recognized him. He wrestled with recollection a moment longer. "Must be someone I've seen around the ship," he muttered to himself eventually. As a senior officer, it was not so strange for the passengers to know his name by now. He tried to shrug it off, but there was something, just an itch at the back of his mind that he couldn't quite reach. "Oh well, a problem for another day," he thought, pushing his plate away purposefully and gulping the last of his drink. "No time to ponder it now. Sekai needs me." Mother Sarah sat on a couch in her private quarters. She was concerned about the details of a military funeral. In fact, she hadn't given any kind of ceremony for a while. Her growing seniority within the church had pushed her ever more towards the role of administrator rather than priest. Major White sat across her coffee table on the opposite couch, sipping his drink. The 3 deceased soldiers were under his direct command, so she sought the Major's advice to make sure she was on the right lines. Determined to do justice to the fallen, the responsibility weighed on her, and not just the military aspects. These were the first funerals she would conduct here, and she needed, even more than usual, to start the healing process, so the people left behind could face what lay ahead. With a heavy heart, she suspected these would be merely the first of many. She pushed that thought down, focusing on the details. The Major was calm and considerate as always, but she could tell that he too really needed a lift. Naturally, he blamed himself for the loss of his men. As a senior military man, he would never dream of admitting to his burden, but she knew, and it increased her determination to get it right for all concerned, which of course led to even more pressure for her. Her own father had served a 12-year tour in the army during his younger days. A warmth spread through her chest as she remembered him, the embryo of a smile tugging at her lips as his favourite phrase leapt into her mind. White gave her a quizzical look. "Sarah?"
Sorry, Ford. I was just thinking about my dad. He had a saying.
She deepened her voice in imitation.
When it comes to the army, Sarah, every problem shared is a problem doubled.
She sighed.
It was always his way to make light of bad situations. How I wish he was with me now.
Sounds like the sort of guy we could all use on the team, White answered kindly. I can't pretend to fill in for your daddy, Sarah, but I've picked up a few adages about military life myself over the years. He chuckled, then sobered. You know, if you ever need support, you can call on me any time. We're all feeling it now and then, right? Mother Sarah smiled affectionately at him.
And that's just one of the things that keeps me going, Ford. Thank you. Despite this whole situation, we're all in it together, or at least most of us are. I'm learning to admire and love the folks on this boat. We've all been shoved so far outside of our comfort zone that it seems like pure science fiction sometimes. But I guess the personal and interpersonal problems we face are common enough. All I know for sure is that I, like all my new friends, no, like my new family, will not shrink from my duty.
I'm not digging that up, snapped Thomas Beckett, outraged. What did you think you were going to be doing here? Asked Natalie, equally outraged. I see my role as purely supervisory, the historian pronounced pompously. Oh, really? Replied Pearson. So, you see yourself in the role of overseer, do you? Perhaps you should watch us dig while you document and catalogue the finds? Pack them up nicely, that sort of thing? Exactly, Beckett agreed. Pleased this tiresome, energetic type was finally beginning to understand the subtle nuances of the role he had carved out for himself. I totally agree, said Pearson. You do? Of course you do. He was clearly warming to his new standing within the community. Absolutely, she stated with conviction. Then she pressed a shovel hard against his waistcoated chest, almost smashing his gold pocket watch. Beckett stepped back in surprise, grappling with the implement to stop it from falling. As soon as we have some finds, you can analyse and document to your heart's content. Until then, you dig. But he sputtered. Do you want to survive this little field trip? She asked. Clearly this pampered, patch-elbow-jacketed library loafer needed the facts of life on safari explained to him. Well, The longer we stay out here, the more chance there is of something going wrong out there. Natalie pointed through the walls of the dig tent. Animals are easily spooked, but before long they will become inquisitive. Knowing the sort of animals we're dealing with, do you think this would be a good thing? Well, of course, I wouldn't want to. Dig then, Natalie barked. We can't afford any passengers on this trip, and every minute counts. Anyway, she added, smiling sweetly, think of it as good practice for when you have to help out with the planting of spuds and cabbages when the compound is complete. I'm a historian, not a farmer. It seems there's no end to the things you're not, Thomas. I'll tell you what I'm not. I'm not even being paid for this. That's what I'm not. Paid? I thought historians were used to working and studying all hours for little or no reward. Well, if all this is simply about invoicing, once you've dug the cabbage patch, feel free to submit an agrarian reform bill at your leisure. Now come on, Thomas. Before he could bluster any more, She shoved him towards the tiny excavation already underway, courtesy of some of Samantha Portree's construction workers. Even Dr. Patel was down on hands and knees, scraping away with a pointing trowel in his hand and a look of beatific pleasure on his face. By the middle of the afternoon, they had managed to lift a section of the fossilized tire tracks out of the ground, packaging them safely onto one of the storage containers brought from the ship. Other team members had managed to retrieve a skull with the top dentition almost intact, along with half of the lower jaw, a few ribs, some lower vertebrae, and most of the pelvis. Were this an ordinary archaeological dig, and the remains those of some long-forgotten Saxon farmer, for example, it would have been a very poignant moment for all concerned. As with all archaeology, the idea and the mystery of touching the past, finding out about people just like us, is always fascinating, always thought-provoking. Imagination takes flight when attempting to reconstruct the daily routines of someone as they built, farmed and played. Separated from us by time alone, a surreal barrier so thin that it stretches forever without ever letting us touch. At least, that was what the team used to believe. The surrealism on this dig was of a different sort, however. Here, the bizarre was compounded with paradox, overbuilt by the impossible, and sported a side order of, "What the hell?" It was unfathomable to all, yet lost on no one. Their portable scanning equipment located further finds. Originally intended for mineral surveys on Mars, the tried and tested ground-penetrating radar and soil resistance suite built into the little machine was an absolute gift for their purposes. Accordingly, the very first protagonists in the brand-new field of Cretaceous archaeological anthropology were astounded by the results it provided. The little unit's frantic beeping naturally attracted the attention of the other diggers. Natalie peeked at the readings on the device's flat screen, whistling softly. Douglas and Patel also wandered over to investigate. "Something interesting, Doctor?" asked the captain.
"I'll say,"
Natalie replied.
"Let me plug this into the desktop holoprojector."
She walked over to the finds table, where Beckett had managed to wangle the job of packing things up for transport. She had to admit, the man's fastidious attention to his immaculate dress appeared to make him the ideal choice for wrapping up other things too.
"That's a neat job, Thomas,"
she encouraged, attempting to rebuild the broken bridge between them.
Beckett grunted, non-committal. She plugged the scanner into the desktop device and tried again. "You might want to see this, Thomas."
A partial representation of the dig site sprang into being, constructed from nothing more than controlled incoherent light. The three-dimensional model displayed 2 cubic meters of the excavation from ground level, shown at the top of the cube, down to 2 meters below ground level. What it displayed made everyone gasp in wonder. Locked within the rock were many human bones, slightly disarticulated, but still resting in the approximate shape of a human skeleton. Viewing the representation in 3 dimensions this way, Natalie guessed that a survey of the next virtual cube might reveal even more. However, even this first slice through the geology held further intrigue for the ad hoc archaeologists, for it clearly showed 2 sets of earthly remains entombed within the mudstone.
"That's amazing,"
Natalie gasped. The full ramifications of this find, even the clear and ever-present danger, were temporarily driven from her mind by the wonder of discovery.
"From the remains already uncovered, I'm pretty sure the first skeleton is male. You can tell by the cranial ridges and from the shape of the pelvis," she explained to the men and women crowding around the display. "Not sure about this one, though. Until we actually excavate, it'll be hard to say for sure. It could be a woman, or possibly an adolescent. We'll see."
Douglas checked his watch. "We'd better start packing up, people. The shuttle will be back for us in the next quarter of an hour." He turned to the Sarge. "It looks like this will go on for a wee while. We'll need to drive the steel pins into the ground outside. When Sandeep shoos the wildlife away with rocket noise, take care of it, Sarge, while we get everything back up to the ship." "Yes, sir," Jackson acknowledged.
"Do we need to take all the equipment, Captain, if we're planning a return tomorrow?"
asked Natalie. "I'm afraid so," said Douglas seriously. We can't afford to lose any of this gear either to rampaging animals or...
When Douglas didn't finish the statement, Natalie hazarded, "Schultz?"
Douglas shrugged. She's out there somewhere, and I'm no giving her any more material to add to the gear she nicked from us.
He spat, still deeply affronted by the larceny aboard his ship.
By the time the dig team heard the roar, a huge shadow was already over them.
Douglas looked up at the underbelly of his shuttle as he pressed the comm speak button.
"Pushing it a bit, weren't we, Mr. Singh?"
"Must have been the direction of the wind, sir," the pilot answered. Douglas raised an eyebrow slightly.
"How about dropping us a rope, Lieutenant?"
"The boys in the cargo hold are already on it, Captain. Sending the cradle down now." Douglas nodded to the Sarge, and the soldiers climbed out through the hatch to set up a perimeter around the cradle's landing site. The shuttle engines appeared to have cleared the area of wildlife once more. Douglas wondered whether the animals might get used to this and adjust. A disturbing thought. Once the Sarge gave the all-clear, the dig crew moved quickly, loading their pre-packed finds and equipment back onto the hoist cradle. After a few trips up and down, it was the turn of the diggers themselves. Finally, the soldiers came up in 2 lifts, bringing the operation full circle as the belly hatch sealed. Douglas, Pearson, Patel, and Miller made their way back to their bridge stations, while the passengers strapped themselves in. With everyone and everything secured, Lieutenant Singh proceeded away in a calm, textbook manner towards the new world. The flight was short, the shuttle landing in its berth smoothly. Singh gently powered down the engines.
"Was that cautious piece of flying for me or the tourists?"
Douglas asked his pilot. "Sir?" Douglas winked.
"Thanks for the lift, Sandy."
He unstrapped and, along with everyone else, made his way to the main hatch. Within moments, the shuttle bay security team, who had become known as the Bird Watchers, gave way to pod engineering and handling staff, as the finds were taken down to the labs for close examination.
"You can leave the equipment," said Douglas. "We'll need it all again tomorrow, and the shuttle will be locked down for the night."
Dinosaur, written by Stephen Llewelyn and performed by Chris Barrie. New installments uploaded each week. Subscribe for more. Visit the link in the description for free New World companion stories, available for download as ebooks.